You're good to go, Eric.
Thanks, Dion. Thanks, Kurt, and thanks to everybody that's joined us for tonight's presentation. My name is Eric Odell. I'm the Species Conservation Program Manager for Parks and Wildlife, and wanted to welcome you to this third and final education session on the topic of wolf reintroduction and management that we're hosting. I'll be the host for tonight. I'm really excited to have the speakers with us tonight that we do. Luke Hoffman, Nathan Lance, and George Edwards all join me. And in a moment, we're going to give them the microphone and the camera and give them the chance to share with you their experiences on game damage, wolf and livestock interactions, and some conflict minimization types of practices. Hopefully it's another one of our very interesting and it's so very well attended educational seminars that we're putting together on this. A little bit of background for everybody. Most of this is probably known by you all, but just to give some good information. So as you know, the Colorado voters passed Proposition 114 in November of 2020 in the last election. And what that does fundamentally is that it gives the Parks and Wildlife Commission, it tasks them with taking the steps necessary to begin the reintroduction of gray wolves by the end of 2023, by December 31st of 2023. And we've assembled a series of webinars to provide a foundation of knowledge and words and thoughts and just different kinds of experiences that others have had for both the Parks and Wildlife Commissioners that have the responsibility for this, and also for the general public. And we're all really glad that you're able to join us tonight. There's several CPW staff working behind the scenes. I do want to take a minute to clearly state that the staff that are assigned in working on the Wolf Project and that have been working on it for several years now, for at least over a year, we're doing it with the highest level of integrity, and we're going to continue to do that. Proposition 114 is statute and it's law. It's what we as the state agency are mandated to do, and we are doing all that we can as quickly as we can to make sure that we put together the best program possible, to make sure that what we're doing is the best for Colorado and the best for wolves too. So I wanted to make that statement. So with that, just a little bit of a recap of where we've been in the last couple of months relative to these education seminars. We had our first session a couple of months ago. It featured Drs. Diane Boyd retired from Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, and John Horn from the Idaho Fish and Game. They described the wolf management experiences in those states and some wolf prey interactions, some of the studies that have in the research that's been going on in Idaho looking at ungulate populations and wolf effects on that. Our second session was last month, featured Ed Bangs and Mike Jimenez, both retired from Fish and Wildlife Service, and they described the efforts that they took leading up to and then immediately after the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone and Central Idaho in the mid-1990s. And both of those webinars, just like tonight's webinar, were recorded and they were posted on CPW's YouTube channel, and you can view those two webinars at your leisure too, and you will be able to view this one in a couple of days once we've gone through the processing side of things. And finally, just before we jump to the presentations, you didn't come here to listen to me talk, you came to listen to the others. I want to give a few just housekeeping tips. This one is being recorded, it will be on YouTube. Each presenter is going to have 20 to 30 minutes to give their presentation. And because we've had several hundred people attend or register for the webinar and the attendee list is quite high, there's really not a way that we're going to be able to take questions from all the public. You do see an email address on this introduction slide, wolfcomments@state.co.us. We are always taking comments from there, and that will inform a lot of our public involvement process, and we will use the questions that we get into that email address to update our frequently asked questions. We're not going to be able to address those questions tonight. We will take questions from members of the Parks and Wildlife Commission and encourage you all to submit questions through the form that has been provided to you as they come up. We've already got several of them populated in here, and we'd like to see some more too. So with that, I'm happy to introduce our first speaker, who is Luke Hoffman, our game damage coordinator for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. So Luke was raised in the San Luis Valley of Colorado, where he attended Adams State University. He's worked several temporary positions for Colorado Parks and Wildlife before graduating from Adams State in 2010. And then after completing the district wildlife manager training for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, he returned back home to the San Luis Valley to serve as a district wildlife manager in that area for 7 years before being promoted to the game damage manager position that he currently holds in 2020. So Luke, we are looking forward to your presentation. You can turn on your mic and camera. I will turn off mine, and Kirk will bring up your presentation. Welcome, Luke. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for tuning into the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Wolf Educational Session number 3. It's my pleasure to present you with this brief overview of CPW's game damage claim process as it pertains to wolf livestock depredations. We have a ton of stuff to cover here in the next 10 minutes, so please stick around for the Q&A portion of tonight's educational session. Next slide, please. Okay, so the purpose of this presentation is to provide a brief overview of CPW's liability for livestock damage caused by big game and now wolves, and outline CPW's game damage claim process. Another goal of this presentation is to describe how wolf livestock claims will be handled until a compensation and prevention plan is created and approved by CPW. To highlight what CPW has been doing to prepare for wolf livestock claims, and also which other states already have wolf livestock compensation plans that CPW is going to be learning from as we move forward. Next slide. So let's start off with a summary of CPW's liability for damages to livestock. CPW is liable for damages to livestock caused by big game wildlife. These damages can't be anything but physical trauma resulting in injury or death to livestock, and cannot be more than $5,000 per head of livestock injured or killed. For these purposes, what we're talking about now, big game species are defined as elk, white-tailed deer, mule deer, moose, bighorn sheep, mountain goat, pronghorn, black bear, mountain lion, and all species of large animals that may be introduced or transplanted into Colorado for hunting or classified as big game by the Parks and Wildlife Commission. Damage to livestock caused by coyotes, bobcats, and domestic dogs does not qualify for CPW damage compensation. However, additionally, CPW is now liable for wolf damage to livestock due to the recent passing of Proposition 114, which requires CPW to assist livestock owners in preventing conflicts with wolves and to pay fair compensation for livestock losses. It's important to note that until a wolf damage compensation and prevention plan is approved by the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission, wolf livestock claims will be processed under CPW's existing damage claim process, which we are going to discuss here on the next slide. Also important to remember that this current wolf livestock damage process could change as the technical working group and the stakeholder advisory group develop a wolf damage compensation and prevention plan that will be presented to the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission. Next slide, please. So what does CPW's existing damage claim process look like? So first, all damage claims must begin with the livestock owner's discovery of damage when their livestock is injured or killed. The owner must notify the local CPW district wildlife manager or local CPW area office as soon as possible to begin the process. Immediately after CPW is notified, the local CPW district wildlife manager meets with the livestock owner to determine the facts of the claim and makes an on-site investigation of the damages. During this on-site investigation, the district wildlife manager determines what caused the animal's injury or death, provides the livestock owner with damage claim forms, and explains the game damage claim process. Once claim forms are completed by the livestock owner, they are submitted to the district wildlife manager or local CPW office, and the claim is recommended for either approval or denial on evidence provided from the livestock owner and documented by the district wildlife manager. It's important to note that all claims recommended for denial are based on CPW regulations and Colorado revised statutes and are reviewed by the Parks and Wildlife Commission. Next slide, please. Livestock value, it's a very important component of the game damage process. So let's briefly talk about how this livestock value is determined when talking about game damage claims. So payments for all livestock claims are based on sales receipts or sales contracts if copies are furnished with the claim. These sales receipts and sales contracts exclude expenses such as transportation, yardage, feed cost, and sales commission. So what if sales receipts or contracts are not submitted with a damage claim? If this is the case, then the values of adult sheep, lambs, and calves are based on the average sale prices derived from the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service reports. Payment for all other claims for livestock are based on fair market value at the time and place of loss for the type, age, and weight of the animal involved. These fair market value sources include the weekly Centennial Livestock Auction Market Reports and also the Sterling Livestock Commission Market Reports, as well as other sources. Next slide, please. So switching gears now, I wanted to highlight what CPW has been doing to prepare for wolf livestock damage claims. The first highlight was a Conservation Day training held for CPW staff in March. Guest speakers from Wyoming Game and Fish discussed wolf management, Wyoming's Wolf Livestock Compensation Program, livestock depredation investigations, and wolf damage prevention techniques to over 200 CPW staff. The second highlight was the creation and distribution of a livestock depredation investigation guide to CPW staff in March. This document provides CPW investigators with attack and feeding characteristics of bears, wolves, lions, coyotes, bobcats, and domestic dogs, and is designed to be used as a reference guide during livestock depredation investigations. Additionally, Game Damage has updated the livestock damage forms also to reflect the state's liability for wolf damage to livestock. And of course, lastly, I would be remiss if I did not mention CPW's discussions with other state wildlife agencies that already have existing wolf livestock compensation programs and wolf management practices. It's going to be really important for CPW to continue to learn from these states while we move forward to create Colorado's reintroduction and compensation plans. Next slide, please. So speaking of other states, CPW is fortunate to be able to learn from these 7 states with existing wolf livestock compensation programs. As I mentioned in the previous slide, it's going to be critical to learn from these states what prevention strategies and compensation plans work, which are not as effective, and what those states would change in their plans. Really important to remember, each of these states have different compensation programs, funding sources, and processes, which we don't have time to cover during this presentation. However, the technical working group and stakeholder advisory group will be learning from their compensation plans while we are creating CPW's plan to present to the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission. Next slide, please. So with that, I hope that was valuable for all of you. Thank you for tuning in. This concludes the first presentation of the evening. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Luke. That's a good introduction, and like you say, many of these things are very new for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and much of this is going to be stuff that topics that both the technical group, the stakeholder group, and we solicit a lot of public input on as well as we go through this planning process. Nathan is going to be our next speaker. Nathan, you can turn on your camera as I introduce you. And again, we're going to hold questions for all of the speakers until the end. So brief introduction for Nathan Lance. Nathan received his bachelor's degree in wildlife biology from the University of Montana and a master's degree from Utah State University. For 20 years, he's been a research or management biologist working in carnivore behavior, ecology, and management. His research has focused on human-wildlife conflicts and developing an understanding of the ecology and social context in which these problems existed. Nathan is currently a wolf specialist with Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks based out of Butte, Montana. We're really glad to have you here tonight, Nathan. Thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to you, and Kurt can bring your presentation up.
Great. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that. So I guess start with thanking CPW for the opportunity to share some of our information and experiences over the last few years, and try to shed some light on what we've learned through our processes. Next slide, please. So I guess quickly tonight, a few things I was asked to cover is just a brief overview of what is our wolf management program, specifically wolf management specialists. What do they do? Highlight some of our experiences with the various risk management strategies, and a brief overview of kind of what happens with our investigations and how they link up to our our compensation program that George is going to speak on. Next slide. So when you look at wolf conservation and management, it's a similar journey to some degree that Colorado is going through in that. And when you look back to the reintroduction in 94 and 95 into Idaho and Wyoming, Montana had small wolf population occurring in Montana. And so it's this shift from a theory, relatively few numbers, to expanding populations on the landscape, and need for management changes. Interest grows in that management. So you have to establish some sort of program to address issues and topics as they arise. Next slide. So as wolves expand on the landscape and your population starts to grow, these concerns can be placed along this sliding scale, whether you're a private producer on the landscape, public using the resources out there, hunters concerned with their elk or deer populations and the impacts that wolves may have on them, concerns for human safety, our pets, concerns with the reintroduction program in itself, and eventually, if you lead to a healthy enough population where hunting or trapping may be utilized as a tool, we're going to have to address that as well. Next slide. So if you go back to shortly after the reintroduction, Montana joined in the management collaboratively with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And we established a specific wolf management program with a program director and a biologist or specialist at the field level. We split the state up to larger scale territories, and we had to do this because at the time, our big game area biologists or local game wardens already were taxed enough with the duties they had, and so we had to highlight special areas. And when you look at our map, boundaries have changed over the years, but you look at the bulk of the areas are in southwest to western Montana, where we are carrying the bulk of our wolf population at this point in time. Next slide. So when you boil it down to our wolf management specialists, it's going to be heavily based, whether it's in the early years with the lower population numbers shortly after the reintroduction, or moving to where we are today, it's going to be heavily based in this population monitoring. And our specialists are the ones that were heavily involved or responsible for trapping, aerial darting or radio calling wolves. In the early years, it was VHF with heavy emphasis on aerial telemetry, ground telemetry to establish home ranges and to identify our minimum population count. But as our population started to expand and wolf numbers grew, it became more difficult. And so we had to shift over more recently to a population monitoring approach that is utilizing our hunter harvest surveys and to have the hunters ask questions about where they're seeing wolves and how many. And from this, we can model and come up with a probably more accurate estimate for our population levels. We still do continue to radio collar wolves. Technology has shifted some, and we are utilizing GPS collars more. But that emphasis on that population monitoring by all or the various stakeholders is critical. And so there is always a concern with where your population is at. On top of it, Montana does have it in statute that any wolf pack near livestock will be radio collared or need to be attempted to be radio collared to aid in the wolf-livestock conflict and management approach at that time. So as wolves expand on the landscape in Montana, they're sharing a lot of the private as well as public land with livestock. And so our specialists are the lead person, collaborating with USDA Wildlife Services, collaborating with the ranchers and watershed groups to address any of the interactions, to apply tools, and just basically address any of the concerns or problems with wolf livestock situations. Heavily involved in the data management. If you go back to the early years, the federal government did require a annual report detailing population levels, wolf mortality, livestock mortality. And today we still continue this type of a report, maybe pared down a little bit, but this is something that is important to the process. And then of course, heavily involved in outreach as well as research. And the research stems either internally with our own department or collaborating with universities and graduate students. And then finally, as our population has grown, wolf trapping was added in as a management tool. And in Montana, we do have a
Hey, Nathan, this is Eric. I think we might have lost you. Can you hear us, Nathan? Oh, it looks like we just lost Nathan. Let's deal with Zoom as we have learned how to deal with it over the last couple of times. George, can I ask you to get ready for your presentation? I'll give your introduction, and Kirk, we can bring your slides up, and then if Nathan joins back on, we'll be able to get him on. So as we're transitioning here, excuse our working through this. Thank you for the patience. Just want to give a little bit of information about George, and then we'll have you jump into it if that looks good for you, George. I see on the screen. So George is the director of Montana's Livestock Loss Board, and he's here to give an overview of that compensation program. And Luke did a good job of saying it too. And just want to make the point that this is just one, the way Montana deals with wolf depredation compensation is just one example. Every state seems to have a different way of going about it. We just don't have the time in tonight's presentation to talk about in detail, that to have invited speakers from all of these different states to describe that. And so the details of what Colorado's compensation program and coexistence program is going to look like is still very much to be determined, but we felt it was really valuable, really helpful to hear from Montana's experiences. So with the limited time, we're not going to be able to get into everything, but do know that this is a very important component that will be part of the plan that we're in the process of putting together. So about George. George Edwards has been the executive director of Montana's Livestock Loss Board since its inception in 2007, so just over 14 years. He grew up on a ranch along Montana's Rocky Mountain front. He was a state brand inspector and worked for the Secretary of State before managing several state licensing boards. His extensive knowledge of business law and livestock background make him a great fit for Montana's Livestock Loss Board. And he's developed everything that's currently used by the board's programs, or so your bio that was shared with me says. So George, we're really thankful for your flexibility and also for you being here today and giving us some of your information. Thanks, George, very much. I'll turn it over to you.
I'm ready. As was just stated, I am the executive director for the Livestock Loss Board. We have a board that consists of 5 members. 3 members have to have a livestock background with some wildlife knowledge, and 2 members with a wildlife background that have some livestock knowledge. Back in 2007, we started with a larger board. It was 7 members, with 3 members appointed by the Fish and Game Commission and 3 members actually suggested by the Board of Livestock and 1 public member. That was awkward in getting those positions filled. So legislators, a few years after we started, pared our board down to 5 members, and that seems to be the ideal working group. Next slide, please. Yes, our board was established in 2007, but prior to our board and our laws being written, Montana had a wolf advisory commission composed of conservation groups, livestock groups, general public. And they worked on this for over 10 years, and they were looking at ways to fund the program and to establish it to make it a very good working model. The result of that group were the laws that I run under and how I developed the program around it. We are administratively attached to the State Department of Livestock rather than the Fish and Game Commission. The legislators, when they were looking through this, felt that a compensation program dealing with livestock fit better with a livestock agency rather than the Fish and Game. Next slide, please. Okay, this is our purpose. And it's stated on the slide. It's the economic viability and sustainability of livestock operations. And we also have grizzly bear loss and mountain lions. Currently in our state, grizzly bears are at the state we were with wolves in 2007. We have just massive numbers and massive amounts of kills. Wolves have been very stable over the past 8 years, and our losses have been pretty consistent, but that also is due to the hunting season. Once hunting season was allowed in our state, the compensation or the claims coming in dropped dramatically. Didn't really have the wolves near the ranch operations during calving time as much, mostly because they were being shot at, but it had a drastic drop in our claims. Next slide, please. Okay, our funding comes from state general fund tax dollars. So Montana, we have an income tax that's our general fund, and legislators initially set us at a $200,000 per year level, and any unspent money from that fund at that time rolled over into the next year. So if we hit a year with catastrophic losses, we would be able to cover it. When our board was set up in 2007, we didn't have a funding source, and that was really tough. Thankfully, Defenders of Wildlife gave us some seed money that helped us our first year and got us through a portion of the second year. And that's about when the legislators went, oh, we're having troubles here, and decided to use general fund tax dollars. The reason for that is the Wolf Advisory Council thought there would be donations coming in to cover this, and a $5 million trust fund was created, but it was not funded. It was supposed to be funded from donations. But we tried, we didn't get donations from anybody. So legislators looked at it and said, okay, there are people who want wolves here. There are people who don't. If we use general tax fund dollars, everybody has some skin in the game. That's worked well until grizzly bears were added, and all of a sudden our claim dollars were going out the window faster than you can imagine. At that point, legislators added another $100,000 to our program, which made it up to $300,000. And we had a law change that allowed us to use anything in excess of that $300,000 per year rolls into our loss prevention fund. We can go back just 2 years and we paid out over $250,000. So there wasn't much money rolling over for loss prevention. The other thing is, I don't know if Colorado has specialty license plates, but in Montana we do. And so people buy our license plate. It's $20 donation, and we have not really touched that money since that was implemented back in about 2012. And so far we're up to around $60,000 that would be used for loss prevention at some time. Most of our funding for wolves for the loss prevention came from a federal grant. It's CFDA 15.666. Senator Barrasso in Wyoming and Senator Tester in Montana created what was supposed to be a 5-year demonstration project, but it has continued to be funded, and all states with wolves are eligible to apply. This year, the deadline was in March. Part of the problem we had with that is with the Department of Interior, those dates were moving. We were getting the money in the spring when it was most needed, and we would run a grant meeting and disperse the money out quickly. And it was at that time around 100,000 per year. Since then, as more states have joined in and the pot of money has not grown, our funding for loss prevention has gone down. There's two parts to that grant. There's compensation and loss prevention. We also apply for half of what we typically pay out in loss claims. So we typically ask for around $35,000 per year. Both these grants require a 50% cost share. So primarily our funding for compensation is from tax dollars. Our money for loss prevention is federal dollars. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide kind of goes to what I was just talking about. We have had quite a few years where we did not have any state money for loss prevention. And so that has been an ongoing problem because we would have more requests for grants than what we had money. What our board did was pare down some of the larger grant requests because they wanted more projects in more places. So people who asked for large amounts did not get the full amount, but they did get something. That's the way our board had handled that. As far as the reimbursement for losses, we'll cover that in the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide is actually fairly important. You can see in 2007 where the numbers were, and then 2008 and 2009, they jumped up drastically. At that point, we actually had run out of money, and I was sending out basically an IOU letter saying that when we get money, you will be paid. And we always paid the claims first come, first serve. In our state, it's kind of strange. A lot of the ranchers will sit on those claims for a couple months, and we don't have a cutoff date on it for them to submit their claim. But it might be something that you guys may want to consider as far as placing a deadline once a claim forms are sent to them, to have a deadline for them to submit the claims. That way you can be more current and more accurate as far as how the money is flowing and where you're sitting financially. Next slide, please. Okay, these are our claim procedures. In Montana, USDA Wildlife Services does all of the investigation work for our board. In fact, when we get into another slide, I'll show you where it's at in law. We advise every livestock owner who believes they may have a loss to a wolf, grizzly bear, mountain lion to contact USDA Wildlife Services first. We had problems in the initial stages of our program where our Fish and Game Agency was saying to contact them first, and there was a couple-day delay between that and contacting Wildlife Services, and the evidence of the kill site was gone. There was not enough evidence left to verify what type of predator had killed the animal. Once we started advising everybody to call Wildlife Services first, that rectified the problem. Once an investigation is done, the state director for Wildlife Services gets a copy of that. And at that point, I work to deal with Wildlife Services, whereas the only way you can get our claim form is from Wildlife Services after they have verified the loss is confirmed or probable. I did that in order to avoid the potential for fraudulent claims. The only way they can get their hands on the form is after an investigation is done. Once the livestock owner has received that paperwork back from Wildlife Services, they fill that out and send it in to me. And like Colorado in the first part of the presentations, if the animals are contracted, we will pay the contracted price. That happens in maybe a fourth of our claims. It's actually not that many. We use the same method as Colorado. We use the USDA market reports for Montana, which averages the auction markets in the state. And we use the value at the time of the kill, very similar to Colorado. If it's a registered animal, we do require proof of registration in order to pay a greater amount. Registered animals can really start eating your money away. Our laws say that we pay the average sale for a registered sale. In fact, this week we had a registered bull claim, and the average for that owner for the registered bulls was $9,094. I've paid for 2 registered bulls just within the last 2 weeks. So we go off of the sale for that particular ranch within the past year. If say they had heifers and they did not sell heifers, then I go to the Montana Angus report, because primarily all the registered stock in Montana is Angus, and I will average the sales from as many as I can. In fact, for a registered heifer 2 weeks ago, I pulled up sales from 12 different producers and used the average for the females for all 12 of those producers, which was a little over $2,000. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the claim form I developed clear back in 2007. It's very basic. We tried to keep it that way so that ranchers would not become confused and could easily fill out the form. The date of depredation isn't so critical for what they write down on there. I use what the USDA Wildlife Services lists on their report. The county on there, I just use for my own purposes as far as tracking to see where the losses are occurring within the state. And you can see the type of animals we cover: cattle, sheep, horses, mules, swine, goats, and the other livestock guard animals is, I'm afraid I sent a old form. There's also llamas. Livestock guard animals are just guardian dogs. We haven't had claims from any other type of guard animal. We look for the breed of the animal, which isn't really specific to our payments, but I look for that primarily for registered stock. The age of the animals, if it's a 1-month-old calf, our law says that we pay fall weaning weight averages. So the rancher puts in what they sold their calves for in the past year, and they list that weaning weight. Typically, that is around 600 pounds. If I get someone writing down 750 pounds for a weaning weight, I will contact them and ask them for proof of their sales from the prior year, because typically they're between 600 and 650 pounds in Montana. Sex of the animal is important because there's quite a value difference between steers, heifers, ewes, and rams. The reason we have animal branded on there is because in Montana, branded animals can be mortgaged and it shows up in one spot that way, or there can be a mortgage filed for all livestock with the Secretary of State's office. And I also look at that brand and compare it to the Department of Livestock's brand records to make sure that that matches the livestock owner name at the top of the form. We do have a question on there: was prevention methods used, yes or no? I can say that Almost all of the claims in Montana check no. We do not require loss prevention first. And what I observed over, well, the past 14 years is there are a lot of ranchers who don't even realize they have wolves on their property. So requiring loss prevention and the money put out for loss prevention for many of the producers, our board viewed that as not really being fair because they didn't know they had a problem until that first loss occurred. Once those losses occur, then they do start getting a little more active in seeking out the loss prevention. But unlike some of the other states that were on that map, we do not require loss prevention. Okay, next slide. Okay, here are the laws that our board was based upon. And primarily, this is the most important one. It's the 2-15-3112. And if you want to pull this up, say someone who's watching this presentation, if you go to www.mt.gov and scroll down, you will find Montana Code Annotated. When you click on that, you start looking for the numbers, the 2-15-3112. This is where it states exactly what we will reimburse for. And it was similar to what I had on the loss prevention form. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, similar to Colorado, and in our law, we cannot exceed fair market value. And so her board sticks with that USDA market report or those contracted prices. There was a change in our law 2 years ago. In Montana, there is basically similar to business equipment tax, there is a fee paid on every head of livestock, and that funds the Montana Department of Livestock. So I have to now go out to our Department of Revenue who collects those fees, make sure they've paid them before I can provide a payment. I don't know if Colorado is set up with any kind of a tax on animals or not, but we do not receive any of the money from per capita fees. We are actually a separate agency, but I do use Department of Livestock's accounting people for payments. There's an exception for tribal members, and I don't know if the wolf territories you have in Colorado cover tribal areas, but tribal members are exempt from these fees. Next slide. Okay, number 3 was amended. Other losses may be reimbursed at rates determined by the board. Our board viewed this as our ability to pay a multiplier. We had some organizations that were challenging that. So number 3 now states that the board may pay a multiplier. Other losses would be similar to things like horses or swine, things that you can't just go out to a regular market report. As far as horses go, those are very difficult to value. You don't know if they're lame or if they're prime roping horse. What we do is we ask the owner to provide as much documentation about the horse, pictures, whatever they can. Like we had a claim for ponies, and we came up with a value of, I think it was $150 or $200. And once we received the pictures, those ponies were used in parades. They were well broke. They were used in all kinds of things. We use Billings Livestock Commission. They have the largest horse sales in I believe the Western United States, and have consigners from all over the country. They have a adjuster in that office, and we send them all the paperwork we receive on the horse and ask them to give us a value, an approximate value, what they feel that horse would be worth. And that's how we pay horse claims. Swine claims, our board just reviewed sales from everywhere we could find and came up with a flat rate of $300 per pig. Goats and sheep, we also used the USDA market report. Next slide. Okay, this is the slide that has the section in the law that says right in the middle of it, the board may not accept any appeal on the question of whether a loss was or was not confirmed or probable loss, because that final determination lies solely with the U.S. Department of Agriculture and Wildlife Services and may not be changed by the board. This is why we only use Wildlife Services for all our investigations. When our laws were being set up in 2007, we had, it was originally FWP that was working on putting together a program. Legislators viewed that as somewhat conflicting because Fish and Game was responsible for maintaining wolves, while livestock losses didn't really fit with a Fish and Game agency. So that's how we ended up being placed in the Department of Livestock, or attached to them. The thing on the USDA verifications is only about half of the investigations they do come back as actually being wolves. The other half are not. They go in, they skin the animal from head to toe, measure bite marks, tooth spacings, hemorrhaging under the hide, all kinds of different things. And I have been out with them many times while they're doing an investigation. It is extremely thorough. The thing of this was the trust issue, where Wildlife Services had no skin in the game of whether that loss was confirmed or determined not to be a wolf. They didn't care either way, and they had the trust of the ranchers. So that worked extremely well for us, and I think that's actually one of the biggest points that has made our board successful. We've only, in 14 years, had 3 appeals on claims. All 3 were denied. We had a sheep producer who had sheep with what was called Cache Valley disease. It's similar to brucellosis. And he tried to claim that his sheep were more valuable because the remaining sheep he had survived the disease, and was trying to claim $6,000 for a ram. Ultimately, he did not get that. I am basically the staff adjuster for the board as well. I am the sole employee for the board. Anyway, next slide. Okay, these are the definitions and what Wildlife Services goes or bases their confirmations as far as confirmed or probable. And this goes into the hemorrhaging and the other things I had just spoke about. Next slide, please. Okay, we also pay probable. When defenders of wildlife were paying claims prior to our board being created, they paid 100% on confirmed losses and 50% on probable. Our board looked at a loss as being a loss, whether it was confirmed or probable, and we pay the 100% on both. But this is the definition that guides Wildlife Services on making those determinations for us. Next slide, please. I hope I'm not froze up.
No, that's your last slide, George.
Oh, okay. I got a few more things to cover. With the tribal entities, we had a law change that allows us to pay tribal members the same amount we would pay someone off of tribal lands. Initially, when the laws were set up, we had to have a tribal agreement with the tribes, and they had to have a management plan that was equivalent to the state. That was okay for wolves because many of them did have wolf management plans. Once grizzly bears and mountain lions were added, most of the tribes in the state did not. So we sought a law change so that we would treat everybody equally and fairly. And with that, I'll just give you a kind of a rough estimate of our annual losses. Typically, they run between $70,000 and $80,000 per year over the last 5 years for those confirmed and probable losses. Thank you.
George, thank you very much. I think my video is up now. Thank you very much. That gives us a lot of good things to think about, and as we're crafting our own program here too. I have good news. I believe that Nathan is back on. Thank you for the flexibility there, George. And Nathan, we will bring you back on, and Kurt can bring your presentation back up and pick up maybe just a little bit before where you left off, and we'll take it from there. And then again, we'll take questions from the commissioners at the end of all three speakers. So if you're ready, Nathan, good to see you again. And Kurt, please bring up his presentation and let you go. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Eric. Apologies, not sure what happened, but thanks for letting me come back in, I guess. So not sure where we cut out or lost, but specialists involved both outreach and research, and then as well as our management has changed over the years. Now they're lead instructors for our Wolf Trappers Ed. Next slide. So as we move into discussing some of these risk management tools or non-lethal tools, there's just some considerations, I guess, to mention or talk about, and from our lessons and as we've kind of navigated through this. You'll hear me go back and forth between discussing risk management tools or saying non-lethal tools. And one of the interesting challenges that we've seen arise is just the lexicon. It seems that by calling tools non-lethal, they're often compared to lethal. And depending on stakeholders' interest or views, they're quite often viewed as competitive type tools. And so it's often confounds the situation, and it's looked at as an either or approach to wolf management. And it's confusing or thinking about this depredation risk management. You have to kind of look at it as a proactive or reactive approach as well. Has the depredations occurred yet? Is it a chronic situation? And so where are these tools going to be applied and to be most successful as well? And when we're talking these types of tools, we can look at it as like a best management approach or focus more on the livestock, or a behavioral type approach focusing more specifically on the wolf behavior. But the good news is with all these tools is they've been proven. They're not really new. They've been around for a long time, utilized in the livestock industry, and have some backing of some pretty rigorous and published scientific publications as well. So as my viewpoint goes, I think there are a lot of tools out there. New research or new emerging tools is beneficial, but really most of the tools that are applied are something that are pretty common or have been in the livestock industry. But you know, the one challenge is, and we have to be cautious, whether it's a manager, whether it's someone looking at some of these tools, they aren't going to be the cure-all or solve 100% of the problems. There's going to be pros and cons to them, advantages, disadvantages, or limitations of the tools. And from my viewpoint, as we're addressing this, we're just trying to build a suite of tools to have the most available in our tool basket to apply to the varying situations. One thing to note, though, and we've had to learn, is with some of these tools that maybe have been applied or research, is there's caution that I would advise on defining success and having clear objectives for these tools. And it's too easy to deem something a failure, whether it's a dead wolf or a dead livestock, without diving into the minutia of possible changes to wolf behaviors. Did visitation decrease? The effect of animals that maybe weren't killed. And so it's just a cautionary approach to what the expectations and the deliverables can be for those tools. And likewise, it dovetails into kind of a simple cost benefit analysis doesn't always work. You can look at tools that may be as cheap as a radio, or compare it to something that's more expensive as a physical type electric fence. And it's not as easy as just a pure dollar value, because they do all have success. But when we're trying to compare them to stress on the producers that they're experiencing, relationships on the ground, and building tolerance as we grow these populations. And it also is going to be very dependent on where you are in your management regime and your population. If you go back to our mid 2000s, where we're running 150 wolves to 250 wolves compared to where we are now with a minimum count of 850, your management approaches are going to change. Depends how your management is set up. If you go back to our early years before delisting, Montana was a split state status. We had experimental populations and we had endangered populations. And so given where you are in your management regime, these tools could change for their benefit of whale and what's available out there. Next slide. So here's kind of the list of tools that I compiled for this conversation tonight. It's where we have the most experience in Montana. I have with research, and I'm sure there's some others out there that we might be missing, but this is a pretty good suite of what is being utilized in Montana, either by producers or collaborative effort. First being MIG, or management intensive grazing, livestock guarding dogs and donkeys, carcass management, particularly with obviously the livestock, types of riders and herder programs, fladry, electrified fladry, and I guess we'd also include just electric fence with this, various scare devices, managing livestock on a high risk landscape, as well as herd composition. Next slide, please. So when we look at MIG grazing, this is not a new concept to the ag industry, but it's historically focused more on pasture and forage utilization, but it's taken these higher stocking densities, more handling by personnel on the ground, and utilizing frequent pasture changes. Next slide. So when we start considering the applicability of MIG grazing, it's more thought of during that spring, summer, and early fall type of seasonality, where we're taking cattle, sheep, and moving them off of calving and lambing grounds onto larger allotments, whether it's public or private type pastures. Historically, a lot of times they have limited human presence out there at times, and this program is increasing that presence, handling the livestock more, grouping them up, keeping them calm, keeping tabs on the health of individuals in that herd. And so it does come at a cost that it is increased human presence, handling of the livestock, and it may require some fencing for whether it's night pens for sheep or goat type programs, shrinking the pastures down for the rotation. And just that human presence, even with the doctoring and sick, helps make sure an animal gets to market, so that increases profitability, as well as taking a highly vulnerable animal off of the landscape. Next slide, please. So livestock guarding dogs is something people are pretty familiar with, and there's not a lot of explanation compared to some of these other tools, but it's utilizing these specific breeds that are bonded with cattle or sheep and meant to stay with them, moving on the landscape and adding aggression towards predators as they come near. Next slide. So when we're thinking about the utilization of these dogs, it's typically anywhere from smaller all the way up to these larger pastures, but there is a limitation to, we get too large scale for the ability of the dogs to cover, as well as too large of bands or cattle herd size. And so they're not going to be as effective once it gets too large with these highly dispersed livestock. But the benefit here is you're adding around the clock vigilance. Aggression can be applied, works better at night 24/7. And especially when tied in with someone like a herder, acts as a alert type system. Some of the challenges, though, with putting dogs on the landscape is, while it's a benefit that it can simulate an occupied territory, as these dogs do engage with wolves, there is risk to these guard dogs for both injury as well as possibly even death by the wolves. And so it does take management from the human to feed these dogs, make sure their health is okay while they're out on the landscape as well. And there is some caution that if the dogs aren't socialized to humans very well, it can lead to public issues on, or user issues with other public that might engage these dogs. But these can be handled and mitigated through socialization with the dogs and better education with the recreating public as well. And more often than not, I guess what I refer to as the big white dogs, we see Akbash Pyrenees crosses, but when you look at it, there's probably roughly around the count of 30 different breeds out there. And while some research is looking at is one more effective than another, I kind of view it like hunting dogs. We have pointers, we have retrievers that all are pretty proficient at that task, but are going to excel at specific behaviors or the way they work something. And so with dogs, we have bigger concern more with that are the numbers adequate for engaging wolves compared to if they were normally used for coyote type programs. Focusing on is there hurt tending type or roaming type behaviors, and if we're putting enough dogs out there, are they staying together? And so if you have 3 to 5 dogs, are those 5 dogs operating together, or do you have 1 or 2 separating off from the pack? Then they are losing, and there is a safety concern there. Something that we have started to change with a lot of our programs as well is trying to encourage these protection collars similar to this one in this upper picture here to help with the dogs. So when they do engage wolves, to give them better chance to do their job and hopefully not have a wreck in the end. Next slide, please. So not as commonly used, but similar concept is the utilization of guard donkeys to bond with the herds, move and assert that aggression as well. Next slide. So really the same utility as dogs. I think the one benefit here that people are seeing is they're going to utilize the same forage. So you're not having to take food out to the dogs. Our programs, I know, do go through a lot of dog food when they're running 5 different dogs on some of these type of projects. But again, we're benefiting from that around the clock vigilance, traveling with the livestock, but again, some care for that animal. In the off season, just similar to dogs, it's not a tool that you just put in the garage, wait for the next project. And so there is some care to the animals there. And in addition, there does have to be some socialization and training with ranch working dogs, and that can complicate and add some difficulties when working around these type of guard animals. Next slide. Carcass management really is a common method that we do see on the landscape, maybe not to the fullest potential that it can be, but it's trying to eliminate attractants that can bring wolves into close proximity that they may not otherwise be around livestock. Next slide. So no limitations on where we're applying this. It's typically used in the programs we see are more spring and fall type, where that death loss is likely or more higher with either calving or lambing or weaning type of year. And as we said, a lot of this is already being done utilizing boneyards, but while it's moved off of maybe the greater pasture scale, they still are on site. We're still finding wolves using them while they're out there. And so it can be as simple as protecting the carcass, burying the carcass, burning the carcass, or it can be more of a landscape approach and collection at the watershed level and hauled off to a local landfill or a composting type program. We do have to be cognizant if there are bears on the landscape and we're just burying them because they will dig them back up. And the other limitation, or where these are often asked to be implemented, is on large allotments and open range, where this can be really difficult to get to the carcasses, to handle them. And so there are going to be some limitations there just on the ability to move carcasses and get them off the landscape. Next slide. So again, riders and herders, really not a new concept. It's using people to manage the herd distribution, interact or kind of act as guard type positions as well. The change, or what we hear maybe, is a change in the lexicon where they're now being called maybe range rider type programs. Next slide. And while they can be used with any type of stock or any type of pasture situation, where we're seeing these come in is more on the larger allotments, that summer type range program. And so here I have noted 640 acres, but really it is a flexible program, but there's going to be limitations on the ability of the landscape and depending on the scale of what a rider or two riders can cover effectively. And the advantages of these types of programs are really going to be dependent on how they're set up and the objectives of the program. Is it focused more on the livestock and managing them similar to MIG type grazing, documenting sick, injured, or dead, just finding those dead so we can get investigations on them. So instead, at the end of the year, if we're 5 short, 10 short, and we don't have that answer, is it plant poisoning or range issues? Is it disease, natural disease? Is it carnivore depredation? So again, it depends on how these are going to be applied. But the benefit as well, if you're tying it together with some of the other tools, that human presence is really a benefit. But if programs aren't used to this, it is hiring extra riders and labor. Again, if they're handling animals, just being out there. But I'd say most of our programs are on the larger watershed type program, but similar to this picture here, this rider is on one side of the valley as well as the other side and covering several allotments. And so that scale does become a problem with their efficacy. Next slide. So when we think about physical types of barriers, it would be something like fladry, electrified fladry, or even just something as simple as electric fence. And it's just a physical barrier protecting or surrounding a pasture, trying to alter a wolf behavior by their fear of a novel object or utilizing an aversive stimulant like electric shock. Next slide. With these type of tools, there is no limitation to how much you want to protect, but in reality, I tend to think of it about 4 miles of fencing, which equals about 640 acres, is really getting on the edge of limitation just for installing it and maintaining it. We see most of it on smaller acreages or smaller pastures during calving and lambing. But the benefit here compared to dogs or any type of guard animals is, again, it can be put in the garage, easily transferred around between people and pastures, relatively small cost on materials, and can be stored easily. The downfall with it is there is a maintenance issue, just like any other type of fence. And so there has to be considerations for amount of snowfall or changes in vegetation growth that can minimize the effectiveness. High winds can wrap the flags around and minimizing the movement of those flags. And so possibly having holes or areas for animals to test. There are limited suppliers for fladry. And in addition with wolves, if we're just talking about fladry, there is a higher risk of habituation, ultimately leading to some sort of failure. Next slide. So dovetailing off of fladry or more scare devices, and we can mention these as motion activated guards, strobe lights, radios, less than lethal hazing rounds. But again, trying to use these stimulants in fear of these animals of novel objects to change a behavior. Next slide. The real consideration and the applicability of these tools is to scale. And unless you're utilizing a lot of them, I would describe it more as 60 acres of use or 60 acres or less, high travel corridors. But again, with similar to fladry, they're very portable, easy to store. Like the light there in the top, you can easily put it in the saddlebag. If they're tied in with a people, whether it's a rider, it's an alert type system. But similar to fladry, you do have risks of habituation, availability. You just don't go down to local fleet farm store and find a plethora of these on the shelves and options. And some of them can even have limitations through federal regulation. Next slide. Considering high-risk landscapes is anything that has high wolf use, possibly related to their prey species like elk calving grounds, wintering grounds, harboring issues during hunting season, or high use areas like den and rendezvous sites. Next slide. So really there is no limitations. It's more just the spatial use of wolves and their prey. And it's trying to reduce that encounter rate with wolves in the livestock. And so it can be labor intensive if we are having to move livestock around. There have been programs that have cooperated with the state to try to disperse wintering elk and push them off private land onto public land. But it does require at times changes to animal husbandry. If you're trying to shift from your spring pastures to more summer range, and if elk are delayed, it may delay that turnout and might have to be looking for other pastures or having some sort of forage to buy some time as well. Next slide. And the last one, I guess, just to mention is herd composition, but it's mixing age classes or breeds or capitalizing on predator savvy type stock on the landscape. Next slide. And so the difficulties with this, it is more of a programmatic change for some of the producers. And most of these efforts have been led by producers, but they're utilizing breeds mixed in with their others or dominating their herd that are maybe a little bit more predator savvy, stronger predatory defense, paying attention to age classes and considering yearlings versus cow-calf operations, or utilizing cows that are used to protecting calves on the range. But with these changes, there are difficulty in handling or transportation of horned animals. If you are mixing breeds in, sometimes you'll see segregation and you may not get the effect you want. And if you're trying to handle, particularly young of the year, if you have overly protective mothers, that complicates that job as well. Next slide. So while we kind of acknowledge running livestock in wolf range is a challenge, there are tools that have been proven that can help increase your probability, build tolerance on the landscape. But we have to remember there is no silver bullet here. And there are a lot of proven techniques. But I guess the next question is, with these techniques, how do we get them on the landscape? And there is a lot of considerations. And with anything, first step is looking at, is something required or voluntary? And why are these being implemented? Is it something that a state is requiring? Is it something a stakeholder group is asking for versus a different management technique? And so public land versus private land rights issues and private businesses is a little bit different than considering on public land. But our most success has come from where there is a desire and a want for these tools on the range. Having cost share programs similar to what George described, having multiple stakeholders involved. Our success has come from collaborating with watersheds, NGOs, state and federal agencies, building loaner type programs. Some of our NGOs have, and watersheds have, loaner equipment that they can pass around and have available. And I think it's critical to, again, to have that technical expertise to apply them on the landscape. So we are utilizing these tools in the best method. So we do have the best success. We don't see failures or unnecessary failures that may deem it not a productive tool, and so no one has interest in it. And so again, this collaborative approach, the desire or willingness to use tools has to be there, or the want to use them. Next slide. I was asked to cover this, but George has done a very good job of it. And I think just the biggest thing with our program is that was set up from the beginning as a collaborative effort and cooperative agreement with Wildlife Services and Fish, Wildlife and Parks, but it is tied to that clear and defined process for investigations, what is considered a confirmed or unconfirmed depredation, how it links up to the compensation program. And it's through these investigations as well that if you do move forward into management after that, that it can be defined through a concise confirmation, if you will. And, you know, as far as depredations afterwards, you can use lethal, you can use non-lethal tools. There's a lot of variables that are going to go into those decision spaces. Time of year, is it a chronic problem? Is it new? Age class of wolves, number of wolves? There's a lot of variables that could be considered for how you move forward. And again, it's going to depend where someone is in their population status and management status as well. Are you a endangered population or experimental? Do you have 10J rules on? And so carry it out more there. But I think more for this talk, we're focusing on that compensation element. So again, I think just a clear, defined process that everybody has to follow, and procedure. Next slide. So with that, hopefully covered some of the things that Colorado was looking for from Montana. I appreciate the opportunity again, and we'll see if there's any questions. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Nathan. That was a great presentation, provided a lot of introduction to a lot of tools and techniques to use as well. I'll ask the other two speakers, both George and Luke, to turn on your cameras too. We've got quite a few questions have come in over the last hour or so, and I'm just going to jump right into it and start with some of the questions that have come in. So the first one is geared towards our Montana friends, and either Nathan or George, I'll let you guys decide how to handle this one. In Montana or elsewhere in the Northern Rockies, were ranchers required to take certain precautions for operations in wolf country before being eligible for compensation programs? I think that might have been answered, George, in your presentation, but just want to give an opportunity just to make sure it's clearly understood.
Yes, I can answer that. And in Montana, no, we do not require any non-lethal work first. And as I was stating earlier, and Nathan could probably echo in on this, many of the producers did not even know they had wolves on the landscape and had losses. And so it was considered unfair to not pay a claim to somebody that hadn't done prevention first, because there's a large expense involved, a lot of man hours involved. And if they don't know how they don't know they have a problem, why would we penalize them by requiring the prevention first? And our board has really stuck hard to that. That is something that has been brought up over the years with our board, and every time they always say, no, we're not going to require the loss prevention first. However, we do fund a lot of the carcass removal programs around the state and have helped get them started. And what I didn't cover in my presentation is we actually came up with the idea of what we call a job trailer. Basically, we bought a 16-foot enclosed trailer, filled it full of flattery, electric fence chargers, electrified flattery, that is, and partnered with USDA Wildlife Services because there was a trust issue with the ranchers and wildlife services that really helped kind of get a loaner program started. And the use of that has just blown up. Just there's more demand than supplies. And Wildlife Services actually partnered with Natural Resource Defense Council, Greater Yellowstone Coalition, and Defenders of Wildlife to help fund wildlife services positions to go out and install the, well, basically give a tryout for ranchers to try those tools, see if it worked for them on their operation. Because as Nathan said, not every tool fits every situation, but it gives a rancher the ability to try out and see if the electric flattery will work for them. And if it does, then give them an incentive to go out and seek and get and maybe buy those supplies at a later date. Just a little side issue, and it's been highly successful. We also bought a Honda side-by-side to help spool out and get the flattery out there. And I know FWP also has programs similar. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Nathan, anything to add to that, or that was addressed? Okay. Our next question, I may blend two questions here. They keep coming in. Thanks for that. Direct losses would be solely confirmed kills. Would indirect losses be loss of performance, genetic base that is not replaceable, additional costs in management, labor, opportunity costs of losing young heifers that would intend to be part of the herd for many years, and the associated stress, both emotionally and financially? But more of a question than more a statement than a question there, but would be interested to hear Nathan and George's reaction to that.
This is George again. That's where a multiplier would come in. However, our legislature, when they funded our program, restricted it to confirmed and probable loss. What we do on, say, a cow that is killed is when we go to the USDA market report, we pay for a bred cow. However, we do not have the ability to cover or pay for those indirect costs, such as weight loss. A study was done by the University of Montana a few years ago, and that student actually had a lot of trouble actually getting ranchers to cooperate in giving records for the amount of weight loss. And I believe it averaged about 20 pounds per head from his study. And but we don't have the financial ability to cover those losses. Plus, they are very hard to measure, and that I believe that's why Wyoming probably instituted a multiplier, but they only cover a very small portion of their state too.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, George. Question for Luke. Under our current game damage program, I think this is directed not just to wolves, but to game damage generally. What does a high livestock damage year look like statewide for claim numbers and amounts? And presumably this information is available to the public on our website.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. That's a really great question. So livestock damage claim numbers and amounts can fluctuate really dramatically from year to year for a whole plethora of reasons. But however, in the last 5 years, 2018 did have the highest average claim numbers and amounts. We had 167 livestock claims, which totaled over $493,000 in livestock compensation costs. On the other hand, the lowest livestock claim year that we had was 2020. And in that year, we only had 109 livestock claims, totaling over $260,000 in livestock compensation. And to put these numbers into perspective, the 5-year average annual livestock compensation numbers and amounts are right around $371,000 with 136 damage claims and 1,608 animals claimed on average. So to answer the second question, yes, all this information is available to the public within the game damage annual reports that are posted on the CPW website at the bottom of the game damage information page. CPW is statutorily obligated to provide annual reports for the General Assembly each year on damage claim information. And on these reports, we put in pie charts and graphs and try to provide as much information as possible on that particular year as far as damage claim figures go. We break it down into different regions of the state on their particular damage costs, so to speak, and not just livestock either. So this is all game damages that we're liable for in the state, which is much more than livestock damage. So yes, that is available to the public. We encourage the public to review that material, and we try to keep the last 3 or so years of annual reports available on that game damage page on the CPW website.
Great. Thanks, Luke. Another question. I'm not sure who specifically to address this one to. Maybe a bit of everyone. Where does Montana rank in terms of number of cows versus Colorado? And so maybe you guys have some livestock numbers there. And then further, has sheep ranching, specifically in Montana, has sheep ranching numbers dropped since the introduction and migration of wolves into Montana? George, I see you nodding. Maybe I'll let you take this one first.
I actually do not know the number of cattle in the state. I would have to go to the USDA Ag Statistics page to look that up. As far as the sheep producers, yes, that has been dropping every year. In the last 10 years, it's dropped actually quite a large amount. Sheep are kind of going out of favor, I guess, in our state. Was there more to the question? I might have missed part of what you asked.
No, you got it there. And maybe as a follow-up, although this is not part of the question, would you attribute the drop in sheep ranching to wolf presence, or are there other things going on?
It's not just wolf presence. In Nathan's area is some of the largest sheep herds in the state. They have not reduced in that area. It's in other areas of the state where sheep are a lot more intensive to take care of, and the producers just have migrated over to cattle. It's I can't say that I've seen a drop because of wolves.
Nathan, do you have anything to add to that?
Thanks. I guess the only thing that comes to mind, I don't have the exact numbers either as well for livestock, but it can be found. But I guess the only cautionary consideration, if we're making comparisons there is a very good proportion of Montana and eastern and central, northern, north central that carry a lot of livestock that are not in occupied wolf territory at this moment as well. And so a lot of times there's comparisons back and forth, but that's the only kind of cautionary tale when we try to make those comparisons against wolves.
Great, thanks to both of you. A question for all three of you, perhaps. What do you think of programs that are sometimes called payment for presence, that pay ranchers for wolf presence on their land or grazing allotments, rather than damages caused by wolves, which are difficult to prove? What does Montana do anything like that? Have a payment for presence process, and regardless of whether or not it exists, what are your thoughts on that idea?
This is George again. I have been actually participating for quite a lengthy amount of time with the Western Landowners Alliance, who is looking into this issue. I'm not aware of anyone in the state that is actually doing that at this point. From the ranchers I've talked to, they're probably kind of more hardcore maybe, but they don't seem to be willing to do something like that. That doesn't mean that they won't change in the future, but right now, I don't see that actually progressing in the state. Nathan might have observed or seen something different, because I see him shaking his head no. And one of the observations is the territory that Nathan covered back in 2007 through about 2011 was some of the hardest hit areas in the state. And one of the changes that occurred during that time period, and this is where Nathan probably would elaborate more, is initially our Fish and Game Agency tried to remove just one wolf and see if the rest of the pack would behave, and they didn't. And it wasn't until full pack removals occurred that the losses dropped. One of the things I've been told, though, is some of those same ranches that had high losses, if the next pack that occupied that territory left their cattle alone, they didn't want those wolves touched because they weren't doing predation. It's kind of seems odd, but there's ranchers who actually want wolves just because the next pack that moves in may not be as nice. I think Nathan could probably cover that better.
No, thanks, George. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a longer in-depth discussion, but I think most of that is based in that shift in management regimes, going from a listed population to a delisted, our approach with the federal service. And I think really it's going to boil down to a difference in animal behavior on the landscape. And George is right. And I think we all agree, we're all about the conflict element. And if there's higher conflict, then the issues are going to arise. And if wolves are being what wolves do and eat the natural prey base, the concerns or angst factor is a little bit lower. But when we talk, 2011 and 2007 years, that was more based in a chronic behavior problem. Depredation is a learned behavior. It was still on the landscape. And so, it's a little bit more complicated on the removals. We did have a paper that came out what George is talking about, that higher removal rates were more successful. And I think the reality of what this is dovetailed into is removing that behavior where you might remove a wolf on the landscape. It's of a larger pack and the behavior is still there. You are moving into those chronic type situations and repeated depredations.
Great, thank you. Thank you both. Coming back to Nathan, to one of the questions, you had mentioned some discussion about different dog breeds. You mentioned both Great Pyrenees and Akbash. What about Kangal dogs? Are they better or equal, or how do they differ in your opinion in effectiveness?
Yeah, great question. And I guess, there is some emerging research looking at breeds specifically. And when I say the big white dogs, it's been kind of the common practice, but we are seeing a changeover to the Mastiffs, Kangals, Anatolian Shepherds. There is a lot more of those emerging. So far, from what I have seen, I've not seen, and I wouldn't hang my hat specifically on a given breed. I think it's more, are we using the tool appropriately? Are we setting the dogs up for success as far as numbers? Are we giving them time to bond appropriately? And do they know their job? A lot of these dogs are brought in as young dogs. And so similar to a young horse, a young hunting dog, what is their experience? Are they ready for it? Are they coming in as naive puppies, or are they being joined in with older adults? And so so far from what I've seen, if a producer is chatting with me, I'm not recommending specific breeds. It's more coming from a reputable source. What are the dog's experiences? Setting them up right for the most success, paying attention to their behaviors. Are they roamers or tenders? And maybe having a mix of it. So I would focus more on the applicability of the tool than the specific tool itself. And like I was referring to, you can have bird hunters argue to the day end, which dog's better. Is a Labrador better than a German short hair? In the end, they are all hunting dogs that can do it, but might fit needs just a little bit differently or depending on the operation. So.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, Nathan. And George, I see you raising your hand too.
Yes, in talking with a lot of these larger sheep producers, many of them have been using Maramas, looks like M-A-R-E, M-A. That particular breed, at least in the very large, one of the largest sheep producers in our state, that's the breed that they actually prefer. But like Nathan, wouldn't recommend other dogs. In fact, I've had people offer me Great Pyrenees puppies to try to find homes for livestock production dogs. And the sheep producers that I've talked to would not take them. They said they were not aggressive enough for wolves. So when Nathan's talking about the different dog breeds, there is a high variability of success rates. And so you actually need a little more aggressive dog. Something that will work with coyotes well may not work with wolves.
Great, thank you. I think we kind of touched on this question a little bit in talking about the multiplier effect, but the question is, what are some of the costs which are not quantified but add significant burdens to livestock producers with the presence of wolves? So costs that are not quantified, but they add a burden to livestock producers.
This is George again. A lot of the producers do not have the time, money, or resources to be out with their stock all the time. They typically are putting up hay in the summer. They're occupied and they can only be out to check their cattle infrequently. Primarily the losses in Montana are cattle. They're not sheep because we don't have that many large sheep operations left. But you have a lot of time and expense. And once you have wolves on the landscape, you need to be checking your livestock a lot more frequently. And those are things that are hard to measure because it would depend on the packs. Like I was saying earlier, there are ranches that have wolves that are not predators and don't have the same problems as when you get in a chronic depredation setting. So the other costs are, the most significant one is actually the weight loss. I always hear conception rates too, but when you have wolves on the landscape, those animals' heads aren't down grazing as much. They're much more alert. And I have not seen anyone actually use guard donkeys in the state. Nathan may have run across somebody that has. And there's only a handful of ranches that use the intensive grazing practices. I think the carcass removal program is probably the best. And if you look into the Blackfoot Challenge, they have a website. Dr. Seth Wilson basically started that and is even hired by European countries to go over and start programs similar to that in Europe. The thing about that, and that goes into play as far as loss prevention first, that covers a large landscape. The more people you can get in on those programs that may not even agree with it initially, once you get rid of those dead pits on the ranches and remove that attractant, that's probably the #1 prevention tool that works. But anyway, as far as costs go, there's no way to quantify it because it's going to vary from ranch to ranch and the amount of labor needed to monitor those animals.
Thanks, George. Another question for you, George, and this is kind of with the big picture in figuring out how to have this coexistence. And the question is this: do you think that your program has increased ag producers' tolerance for wolves? And if you had to narrow it down, what is the main reason why the Montana compensation program works well for livestock producers? So has it increased tolerance for wolves, and what is the main reason that it works well?
One of the things that I don't use when I speak in meetings is the word tolerance. Because when I speak with ranchers, that actually causes a reverse gears. Instead of tolerance, you're getting more of, I don't know really how to put it. It causes ranchers to kind of reverse gears, I guess is the best way I could put it. As far as the tolerance went, the first few years our program operated, it was not as well received, but once the ranchers felt that they were being adequately compensated and there weren't sideboards placed on this, and primarily their focus was always back to the USDA Wildlife Services folks doing those investigations, they felt they were being fairly treated. And so from that point on, almost all of the ranchers who submitted claims, or I mean, all the investigations that occurred by Wildlife Services, a vast majority of them submitted claims. There are a few ranchers out there that will say the state should not be in business for paying for dead animals, and they would rather see wolf removal. That's very rare now. The animosity towards wolves is something that I haven't heard for probably the last 6 years. Our program has been considered very fair, and I think that's part of what has caused that animosity to go down.
Thanks for that, George. That's helpful to hear. Nathan, do you have anything to add to that in terms of your perception from the state agency side?
I think George spoke well to the compensation program, and I think one of our things in shift in time, and I appreciate his comment on tolerance, because it's often tough to label behaviors or perceptions of what people have, and it's tough to, unless you do a human dimension survey. But what I would say in my tenure in Montana, I mean, it's absolutely changes, whether it's, you want to label it tolerance, the animosity, as George says, there is a shift or dynamic. And I think a lot of that is maybe the best tool is time. And we need to let the world turn one more time. And I think this management speaks to both the ag end as well as the wolf end. It's sometimes the first time to the rodeo. There has to be trust in wildlife services. There has to be trust in the fish and game agencies. And as we go down this road together, and we are collaborative and they do have a voice, time passes and the sky didn't fall. And I think that goes both for the state agencies and managing wolves. There was lethal removal at times. And we have grown a population here. And I think some of the most empowerment in Montana was shift or changes as we moved along in the management. Changes when we had a split status, it was really tough in the state to have one landowner that could defend livestock when a wolf was chasing and actually engaged in attacking. If they could kill that, that was a heck of a lot better to the guy across the street that was in a different zone that didn't have those liberties. So as we move to that, as we move to legal hunting and those type of programs, that did help move us down the road as well. Compensation programs help as well. And so it's just building trust and collaboration and moving down the road.
Thanks for that, Nathan. I appreciate that. And George, I appreciate your comment too. Words do matter. The words that you use and the language that you use, that we use as the state agency matters. And we're very cognizant of that and appreciate that comment. All right, a few more questions that are coming in. I think this is directed mostly towards George, although maybe Nathan has a comment too. What does Montana's loss prevention program compensate ranchers to implement? So other than compensation for dead animals, what kinds of proactive practices can be implemented?
Well, the proactive processes in that are, there's a reluctance to do them in some areas, and that varies along the state, and it varies along with the number of wolves in the area. So you're going to have a large variety in that respect. And we've always promoted the loss prevention, but that's also been the hardest thing we've been able to find funding for. And I guess I end up talking to ranchers more than anyone else, but it goes to what Nathan was saying on the trust issues. You're not going to get the cooperation to do a lot of these programs unless you can build that trust. And so where you may have a reluctance from ranchers, one of the things I've observed is when you do have a rancher trying something in an area, neighbors talk. And once those neighbors talk and they find something that works, then you get a trust level and you get cooperation, and then the neighbors are starting. One of the things I've heard too, this is probably more from the end that dislike wolves more, is that, well, my choo-choo derailed. Sorry about that. But anyway, you'll have ranchers that no matter what you do are not going to be willing to do anything. And so you guys have a hard road to go for the next few years as you begin this process. Nathan said it best. It's going to take time, and it's going to take building trust. And if you can get a few ranchers to try some of these loss prevention management tools, that's where you're going to gain the more acceptance and start to see those types of things expand. But that's also why our board doesn't require the loss prevention first, is we don't want to increase animosity. And you can end up with that happening as well. And I've seen that in other states and talking with ranchers from other states. I received quite a large number of calls from Washington and Oregon about how their programs are going, and they're going, how come what do we have to do to get our programs running similar to yours? From the rancher's perspective, not the state perspective. And I tell them, you need to talk with your legislators. I don't know if I answered the question correctly, but I at least made a stab at it.
I appreciate the effort. We're getting close to the end here, and I guess a good way to close is, and you kind of teed it up nicely there, George, is, we're at the beginning of this process. We in some ways have a clean slate, and just in closing, as our game damage program is developing and figuring out how we're going to address compensation and all of these other aspects of conflict minimization, George and Nathan, we're really interested to hear if any last advice. What would you tell us, and as we're teeing this off and getting ready to jump into this, and with all the options open at this point. Any last minute advice? And certainly this isn't going to be the last time you hear from us. I imagine that Luke and others are going to be calling you and asking some more detailed specific questions. But aside from that, any last minute advice for us to consider as we're putting this plan together?
Use caution with who you partner with, as far as that trust level, because ranchers already have a distrust of many of the nonprofit organizations, and work it in gradually. Like our deal with the loaner trailer, and Wildlife Services then seeking out and getting funding from Defenders of Wildlife and NRDC and organizations like that. That took some trust, because now ranchers are allowing some of those folks onto their places to help implement some of these tools. And it's a slow process. And as the ranchers have, I go back to the one rancher talking to the next, if they've had success and the folks on the ground are treating them with respect, you gain, eventually you gain the acceptance of some of these organizations coming in to help. But the initial organization, or our first 2 years of operation, the distrust factor with our program was they thought we were an NGO. And the same folks who were pushing wolves on the landscape. And it took a while for our program to earn that trust, for folks to understand that we weren't. So that's my word of caution, is go at it slow. Be careful who you partner with initially, earn that trust, and then work from there.
Thanks, George. Nathan, any last minute advice for us?
No, I think George said it well, and I guess I commend you guys. I don't know if we have the answer, maybe you guys have the answer. It's a difficult road to go down. And I don't know if we're not going to make all parties happy. Everyone's going to be upset to all degree. And I think the biggest thing in what you guys are doing and setting it up, it's a collaborative effort, transparency, letting that world turn one more time, building the trust, being in the community. You guys already have great relationships on the ground with your people. It's utilizing that. Wildlife Services has great relationships there. And so it's using all parties involved that have the stake, and everybody goes through these learning curves. No one's done it right. I think it just takes time. Minnesota and Wisconsin, Michigan are still struggling with it. Our Western states, Oregon and Washington. And so the challenges are there. I think you guys are doing well, and it's just one step at a time, and it's going to be an uphill, slow battle. But I think if everyone works together, has some tolerance, you guys will get there. So I think you're doing very well. Thanks for the opportunity to help chat with you guys.
Great. Yeah, you're right. Trust, words matter, language matters, trust matters. All of that is going to help us as we put this program together. Nathan and George, and of course Luke as well, thank you guys all very much for spending the time this evening. Thanks to everybody that tuned in. We've maintained a high audience throughout the last almost 2 hours here. Thanks to the commissioners for the really good questions that came in, and again for everybody that attended, and especially to all the CPW staff that are working behind the scenes and helping us figure out all the curveballs that Zoom keeps tossing to us. We seem to be able to handle all of those. We've got a really great staff. So thank you to everybody involved. And with that, we're going to close this session. It will be posted on YouTube in the coming day or days. And thank you all very much. Have a good evening.